delighted to have Mark Hoplamazian, the CEO of Hyatt Hotels Corporation, with us today. Mark, thank you very much for the many roles that you play. I know you're active in civic and charitable organizations. You were also the chair of HLA last year. And we appreciate your strong advocacy for the industry. It was difficult to lead during such a challenging year, but you did a magnificent job. And I'm particularly grateful for the strategic plan, a 5-year strategic plan that you developed. And it gives the organization such a wonderful blueprint for future success. So we want to thank you for that. And thank you for being on the show today, Mark.
Well, David, it's a great pleasure. And thank you for everything you've done for so many thousands of members of our industry over a long period of time. So appreciate it.
No, thank you. I worked for Hyatt in the early 80s and 90s for 19 years. It's truly amazing for me to see the magical transformation that you ushered in since you became CEO in 2006. You've dramatically grown the number of brands, you expanded Hyatt service offerings, and you established tremendous footprint in the last 15, 16 years. It's truly impressive in every sense of the word. But Mark, you began your career in First Boston Investment Bank before joining the Pritzker family as an advisor. Can you share with us your journey and some of the factors that contributed to your success?
Sure. By the way, it's always been a source of pride for me that you're a member of the Hyatt family, David. So that will always matter to me in my heart. So thank you. Sure. Coming out of college, I went to Wall Street, which is I didn't know anything about banking or investment banking at the time. So it seemed like a place to go and have an amazing breadth of experiences. And I guess my thinking at the time was, I don't know what I want to do in life, and I don't know much about business. So I better get as broad a exposure as I possibly could across as many industries and also as many different areas. So that's why I went in that direction. And I learned a lot. It was a high pressured kind of go-go time on Wall Street. 1985, 6 and 7 were very active, but I learned a lot. And then after business school, my choice to go to First Boston, though, was very much based on how it felt to me. It felt like it was a place with real people who were, I guess, authentic to me. And coming out of business school, I made a similar I made a choice to go work for the Pritzker family, which is the family that founded the Hyatt Hotels Corporation back in 1957. And that was entirely based on a people decision. So in both cases, it was about who are these people? Do I feel good about them? Will I be able to learn from them? Do I respect them? That sort of thing. And here I am 35 years later or something like this, or 33 years later, and still in and around the Pritzker family, in this case, working for Hyatt. So I think, that longevity is a little unusual, but I think for me, it just happened to be that the most important decisions, my jobs, my marriage, having children, there aren't too many other really big decisions I've made. Those were all based on it feeling right to me from an emotional, psychological, and intellectual perspective. I think you have to have alignment like that in those decisions.
Oh, I totally agree with you. It's kind of hard to find fulfillment and enjoy what you do without people. You've got to work for the right people. Yes, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I no doubt, like all of us, you must have suffered some setbacks and disappointments in your career. Can you share with us some examples of when things didn't go your way and how you mustered up the courage and perseverance to eventually prevail?
Yeah. There are plenty of examples. When I was working for the Pritzkers prior to the time I joined Hyatt in 2006, so from 1989 to 2006, I worked for the family office. And there were myriad of deals that I worked on, transactional activities and working with businesses, which met with great challenges. I remember specifically a transaction I was involved in early on in my career where some of the core assumptions I had made about the business model that we were going to underwrite proved to be false. And I was both embarrassed, but also realized that I had really, I think, missed some important things, which really made me reflect. And I became a student of, my boss at the time, Jay Pritzker, who had an amazing ability to really focus on the things that mattered the most. So I started to really work on that and make sure that I always began with the most important questions and the most key items. So that was a really seminal learning experience. And when I invited the partners to dinner to explain to them that we weren't going to proceed with the transaction, I paid for it myself because I felt so guilty about about screwing up, and I kept that receipt for years as a reminder that I didn't only mess up with respect to the application of my own time, but I also put them out, and that didn't feel good. So that was a big lesson. I think the other things that I can reference from a maybe more recent time, we had launched Hyatt Place and Hyatt House, two new brands in 2007, and we were signing deals up like they were going out of style, and then the Great Recession hit, which was a massive curveball, and we went from having 75 signed deals to having a handful, literally. And I had laid out a 5-year plan for the company based on the expansion of this new business line and so forth. So we had to go back to the drawing board in a big way. And in that case, the key was really staying flexible, but open-minded about what the possibilities could still look like, but not dwelling too much on what had been the plan previously, but evaluate this new environment and build a new plan. So I think that ability to just for the organization, not just me personally, but to really let go of whatever you believed happened, needed to have happened or was planned to happen, and really focus on the realities of the present, and stay focused on the issues. Back to my first example, and make sure that you identify all the issues you need to, and then get to work. So maybe those are two examples of things where a big lesson to begin with, and then later on the application of that lesson in a specific example.
Those are wonderful examples. I really like what you talked about in terms of focus on what's the most important, because so often, there's so many things that would distract us, but keeping focus on what's really important is a great advice. And also being able to adapt and recognize that the past assumptions may not work now with a new environment. And coming up with a plan constructively and proactively is also wonderful advice. Thanks for sharing.
No, my pleasure. And David, both of us have served for many years in CEO positions. And one of our most important jobs as a CEO is to allocate resources and to prioritize. So, I think all of that, those experiences and that learning really apply every day in my life now. And I'm sure they did the same for you over your tenure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about challenges. No doubt we've all faced challenges, but let's talk about the approach that you like to take when you face a challenge.
Well, I guess some reflection on me, self-reflection, is that usually when something happens, something goes wrong, or we end up with a challenge, a big challenge or a crisis on our hands, the way I'm wired is to look into myself and think to myself, was there something I missed? Is there something that I should have done or could have done differently? Not by way of blaming myself, but by way of taking responsibility right away. I am not the person who's starting off and saying, okay, who is responsible for this? I'm always looking into myself, which creates a level of energy. I would say maybe some stress sometimes, but definitely a level of energy that motivates me to really focus and move quickly. So I would say speed and going straight at problems is always my inclination. And the more sticky it is, the more intense my application of energy tends to be. So I would say I run towards issues and challenges when they come up. I get very actively engaged, maybe too engaged sometimes. But my inclination is to roll my own sleeves up and get involved. So, but I think the fact is, it's really important to properly diagnose what the issue is quickly and accurately before you take action, because oftentimes, if you act first and aim later, I think you end up with other unintended consequences and sometimes doing more damage.
Yeah.
So I'm always cautious about making sure that I truly understand what the situation is and what's at stake. So that's my generalized approach, and I think it's sort of served us well in general. I think the pandemic that we just went through, which is a severe case of this, was more challenging because it was so opaque. We had such little information. We were very ignorant about what this virus was all about. So it took a lot longer to assess what was really happening. And as a consequence of that, the name of the game was continuous adaptation and staying agile and very flexible along the way.
Yeah. Oh, I love what you said. Sometimes we get overwhelmed with a big problem and we procrastinate, but I like what you said about the speed. The bigger the problem is, the faster you're going to move to analyze the root causes of the problem and what are the solutions that you can possibly pursue and dedicate the time and resources to it. I just love that. And also the pandemic, no doubt, we were all flying blind because we didn't know what to expect. And
Right.
being able to adapt quickly is also important.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your purpose statement, which I really, really love, which is to care for people so they can be their best. Can you elaborate on that? How did that come about, and what is your focus with that?
Yeah. So when I first joined Hyatt, I was interviewing someone for a job, our first ever CHRO at the corporate level, and he asked me at the end of the interview what was most on my mind, and what was maybe a source of something that's unresolved in my mind. And I said, there's something really special about Hyatt that I love. It's the reason I joined the company, and that is people in the Hyatt family really care. They're engaged in doing what they do, not so much because it's a job and they're getting a paycheck, although those are important things. It's because they really care. And I said, but I can't quite put my finger on the essence of that and bring it to life in the way that I feel it. I feel it a certain way, but I can't describe it to others in a crystallized way, and I got to get my hands around that. And the analogy I used quickly is at the beginning of NASA. It's an apocryphal story, I think. A news crew went to Houston, and as they were on their way down the hallway, they stopped and asked the janitor what he was doing there, what his job was, and he turned around and he said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." Complete clarity of purpose. Complete clarity of purpose. And so it took a long time for me to turn back to this because I got distracted with many other commercial exigencies. But at the end of the day, I realized that everyone talks about service in the hotel industry, but at Hyatt, it felt like it wasn't about just serving other people. It was about caring for them. And the difference is the practice of empathy. So if you practice empathy and you really understand for a moment what's going on with the person that you're trying to care for, you can care for them. But sometimes if you don't take that moment, then you're just serving them. You're pushing services to them instead of really embracing them and treating them as they need to be treated or would like to be treated. There's this old golden rule: treat others as you would have others treat you. My modification of that is treat others as they would like to be treated, or how they would best be served to be treated. And what I mean by that is the way my sensitivities and what I prefer. So I'm not wired to take a presidential suite and have lots of amenities and a bottle of wine left for me. I'd rather have a regular room where I don't have to mess around turning off the lights all the time. So if you end up pushing to me great service, which is a fancy bottle of champagne and a big room, and that's actually not serving my purpose, then you've served me, but you haven't cared for me. And I think there's a huge difference. And so really the center of attention for us is about care. And we talk about caring for people. It starts with colleagues. First and foremost, our colleagues have to be cared for, because if they're not, then they can't care for our guests. And finally, to be their best, like, we're not in the business of making everybody magical and happy. I think Disney does a great job of that, and I'm not going to compete on that basis. We're serving real people who are going through their lives, and sometimes they're there for a funeral, sometimes they're staying with us because they're going to a wedding. It just depends, and you have to get abreast of that, understand what their purpose of visit is, and see how you can help them be their best for what they need in that moment. So that's really what's behind that statement. Lucky for us, we were able to get it down to 10 words.
Actually, I love it so much that, people talk about personal brand, and I love for this to be my personal brand.
Wow.
And I'm sure you're the same way. And I like
That's a
how
great
you
honor, David. Thank you.
I like how you explain it. It's much more than service. It's about empathy, and empathy and action equals care. Like you
Yeah,
often.
that's right.
I love that. Love that. Now, you have several stakeholders. It's not just the associates or the guests. You also have shareholders.
Yes.
So how do you apply this purpose statement to the shareholders?
Sure. Let me just start by saying purpose. The concept of purpose has become a tremendous level of focus in the business world, partly because of Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, who has written several letters to management teams about the importance of purpose, and also the Business Roundtable, which several years ago published a statement about the role of business in a broader context and how important purpose is. So in today's world, it's become commonplace to be talking about purpose. We started our purpose journey back in 2012, so 10 years ago, really 9 years ago specifically. And so to me, in the early days, I had to really work with my board to have them understand that this wasn't sort of an HR initiative. This was an actual alignment of interests of the entire company around a principle to care for people so they can be their best that would absolutely drive better performance over time. And what I meant by that was, if we care for our colleagues, and they in turn can care for our guests and customers, and really end up being able to perform better at the hotel level. If we care for our owners, our hotel owners, and they end up making better returns and then sign up with us for more properties, at the end of the day, our shareholders will benefit tremendously. Over the course of the last 9 years, we've also paid close attention to what kind of corporate citizens we are in the communities in which we operate. So I would say I would include the people in our communities, our vendors, our suppliers, others in the communities in which we operate, as also some of the people that we have to care for so they can be their best. And so I think all of that actually devolves to the benefit of our shareholders. I personally absolutely reject the idea that fulfilling purpose and making profit there's a tension that you have to manage and a conflict. I believe that one fits to drive the other. I think purpose can help you drive more success in your business, and that's actually what has come to pass, I think, for us, if I can say so. Because we've met with very strong success, and we've grown a lot, and I think that is the outcome of being focused around this purpose. And so I would say we don't look at it as a conflict or a tension that needs to be managed. We look at as one supporting the other.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. You're taking the balanced scorecard approach, thinking about your customers, your associates, your shareholders, as well as the community. It sets up a virtuous circle.
Exactly.
I love that. Love that.
Exactly.
We all had to make very difficult and regrettable decisions during the pandemic. And It's difficult to reconcile having to let a lot of people go because of the company needing to fight for its survival. And especially given this purpose statement about caring, share with us what went through your mind at that time and how you reconcile that.
Yeah, so maybe I should start and say that we did actually effectuate a significant reduction in force in May of 2020. About 35% of our corporate staff and an even bigger percentage of our hotel level staff were either furloughed or terminated. And at that time, I would say, instead of starting with what was going through my mind, let me start with what was going through my heart, which was really a tortured feeling. It was extraordinarily emotionally draining and very, very difficult. Probably the most difficult challenge I've lived through in my life. So it was at first inconceivable to me that we would take such an action given our purpose as a company. Well, what I came to understand and realize and think about is we have certain obligations as an enterprise. We are fiduciary to many hotel owners around the world, and ultimately to our stakeholders, our bondholders, and our shareholders. And I spent all of my time in the second half of March and April and May raising money, because we had no idea how long the pandemic would take. We had no idea how much money we would need. And we didn't even know whether companies like ours would come through this and survive to the other side of it. So we had sort of what I would describe as a true existential threat at that time. And so as I thought about it, what I came back to was, we do have this purpose that we need to stay true to. And there are two dimensions of it. The first is, if we don't survive as an enterprise, then we can't fulfill that purpose. And there are still many thousands of other people who would still remain within the Hyatt family that we would take that forward with the hope that we would reunite the other members that we had to let go in the short term. The second thing that was true is that the way in which we effectuated these reductions could be done with the demonstration of our purpose in it. And so we formed a care fund, and we distributed more than $18 million for financial support for families who weren't making ends meet with their other means of support. We created 2 different communication platforms to stay in touch with former members of the Hyatt family to help them in their journey towards finding other jobs. I personally got engaged, and many of my colleagues did, in helping to support other former colleagues get jobs. And so we did all of this in the context of really trying to care for those people, even as we had to let them go or furlough them. Extension of healthcare benefits for furloughed individuals was another dimension of what we did. And then for those who remained, there was also tremendous learning there, which was a tremendous feeling of guilt and sadness and disquiet and stress. And so we focused a lot on mental health, and we created a mental health tracker with the help of Cornell Medical to help people track their own mental well-being and identify ways in which they may be under stresses that they didn't quite or weren't able to really self-diagnose and understand well. And we provided them with resources. I mean, a lot of people have employee assistance programs, but they're not widely used because there's still a stigma associated with mental health issues. So we really elected to go a different route. And tens of thousands of our colleagues have used it, and it has been beneficial. So our focus on well-being, which had been pre-existing pre-pandemic, extended into this space. So I think it's not just the fact that we were concerned that we weren't going to survive as an enterprise to continue to fulfill purpose. It was also that we needed to effectuate these horrible decisions that we had to make in a way that was still caring. And that took a lot of effort, but was essential, because had we not done that, we might have won that battle, but we would have lost the war. I think people would have lost faith that our purpose was really meaningful. And that did not happen. We came out of 2020 with even more resolve and more commitment and dedication to our purpose than ever before. And I think it's entirely because people saw how we acted during that period.
I really have so much admiration for you and Hyatt during in terms of how you handled the pandemic, and what you did was just remarkable. And action always speaks louder than words. And what you did in terms of continuing to provide healthcare coverage for the fellow employees, and setting up this care fund, and you donating generously and motivating your team to donate generously to continue to take care of people, that is just absolutely remarkable. And providing and being aware of the mental health challenges that we all face, and doing something about it was also just remarkable.
Well, thanks.
Thank you for doing that. Let's move on and talk about ESG and DI efforts. I know following the tragic events of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, you really stepped up. Hyatt made a number of pledges to fight systemic racism and achieve equality. You developed a very comprehensive program. Can you share some details of this program with us?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. The George Floyd murder was really a deeply emotional one for me personally, and for many of my colleagues. And it caused a very significant reassessment about what we had been doing and what needed to be done looking forward. So it was definitely an inflection point, a sharp inflection point in our work. We really focused on what the underlying issues were, and we realized there are systemic issues, and that going down a path that only included one dimension of what needs to be done, say representation of people of color in your business, or of women in your business, was not sufficient. We needed to think about supporting the whole ecosystem that needed to be supported in order to change the trajectory with which people of color in the United States in particular were getting ahead and actually advancing. So we really focused on three elements. The first was who we hire and develop and promote. That's really about representation, and we committed to double the representation of people of color and females in leadership positions at Hyatt over the next 5 years. The second was who we support, meaning philanthropically and volunteer-wise, and I'll come back to volunteerism in a second, meaning a special focus on organizations that were community-based organizations helping members of the Black community in particular, where the dislocation was the greatest. And the third happened to be focused on who we partner with, and that was really about our supply chain and who we're buying from, and the proportion of what we're buying and what we're supplying from businesses that are owned by women and by people of color. On the volunteerism front, in the second category, we actually required people to dedicate minimum amount of hours to mentorship and support and engagement with community-based organizations that were helping disadvantaged neighborhoods or communities, with a special focus on the Black community, but it was in general disadvantaged communities. And we started in Chicago as well, high focus, because this is where our headquarters are. And my belief was, having had some personal experience with this, is that it's one thing to give money away. It's another thing to actually confront and see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears what's happening in these communities and what the issues are and what the conditions of life are for so many people who are being left behind. So it was really a vehicle to ensure that the elevation of awareness and knowledge and elimination of some ignorance that we all live with was part of the program. So that's actually, excuse me, what the design of that was. And I'm really thrilled to tell you that from the beginning of that initiative till now, we have over-indexed on the volunteer hours in a significant way. And I think a lot of people didn't realize just how powerful that personal engagement could be. And that really animates your focus and awareness, your knowledge base, and also your commitment to make sure that you fulfill on the commitments that you set out to make.
That's just so remarkable to hear. And I love how you take such a comprehensive, holistic approach to solving this problem. Let's also talk about your recent recognition, scoring a perfect 100 on Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equity Index. And I read that this is actually the 18th year you've won this recognition.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell us your efforts in creating a safe, inclusive, and caring environment for LBGTQ+.
Yeah, I think it's really first and foremost, it's about the culture, and you can't really care for someone unless you start with who they are, and their identities, and respect their identities, and therefore it's inherently got to be an inclusive environment and an inclusive mindset with which you approach culture and the community of the Hyatt family. That's been alive and well forever. I'm not the purveyor of that. I didn't initiate that. I made sure that we were continuing to emphasize that and focus on it. But I am proud of the track record. But honestly, it dates back a long way. And if I go back to, I don't know, maybe the late 60s, the Hyatt Regency Atlanta, which was the first big scale hotel that Hyatt had, opened in 1968, was one of the few hotels few large hotels in Atlanta that would actually accept Martin Luther King and his organization as clients for their gatherings. And he even called the hotel of Hope. So it goes back to this general mindset of inclusivity and how you approach things. I think the sincerity with which this is pursued at Hyatt is very, very high. And part of it has to do with the fact that in our industry, this is now, I'll extend it to the entire hospitality industry. We operate in so many different environments, and we employ people of every background known to man on this earth. Known to people on this earth, I should say, not just man. And it's, I think we have the benefit and the reality of living in that world day in and day out, 365 days a year. You know this well because you did the same. So for me, it's a reflection of the actual reality of the communities in which we operate and we are active. And that's really important to reflect in how we operate and what kind of environment we created within Hyatt.
Yeah, I applaud Hyatt for all these undertakings, and everybody can have a program, but I really like the word that you use, which is sincerity, the sincerity in which you use to pursue these programs and keeping that purpose statement in mind at all times about caring. It's just wonderful to hear. I've taken up a lot of your time, but before we let you go, would you mind to dispense some advice for aspiring women and minorities?
Sure. I guess the thing that I would point out is that the best advice I can give is to go towards opportunities that you think might be available, and I would even say be aggressive about pursuing them so that you have opportunities to advance and be seen to be interested in advancement yourself. It's easier to say that than to have everyone say, "Oh yeah, easy for you to say. You're the CEO of the company." It does take courage, and I guess I don't have an excess of self-confidence as a person. So I've always been led by, working harder and being sure that I'm, doing what I need to do. So I have had issues throughout my career of, questioning myself as to whether I could step up to do something, including taking my current job 15 years ago. So I say it with humility, but I do think that it's important to work hard to get there, because that's really where growth occurs. If you're always in a comfortable position, it's hard to grow. So putting yourself in an uncomfortable position often forces you to grow effectively, but also it communicates something to others in the organization that you're interested in learning and growth. The second thing I would say is, if you find people who are truly connecting with you, who are want to help you advance, go towards them aggressively. And I'll just give you a specific quick example. I was one of the judges for a competition called She Has a Deal recently. Two young women presented. Now, it happened to be a Hyatt property proposal, so I was specifically focused on it, but they did an absolutely unbelievable presentation. And the 20 to 30 minutes of questions that came, not one question went unanswered in detail with great thought. And I thought, wow, they came so prepared and they invested so much of their time to demonstrate their passion and their seriousness about it. That by itself deserves my support. And so I actually reached out to them after the competition. They were not the ultimate winner of the competition that day, but I reached out to them to say, look, you two are going places. You're doing some amazing things. I have a tremendous amount of respect, and I want you to know how impressed I was. What can I do for you? And they have in turn come towards me to say, okay, so here's some ideas that we've got. We'd love some direction, like who can you introduce us to that could help us with something? Or do you have any contacts in this particular area? So they're being proactive about it, and so too am I. So I feel like if you as a person of color or a woman find people along the way who are taking that interest, go towards them. And I would say go towards them and don't be self-conscious about it. Just recognize that, there are people out there that are interested in helping to sponsor, support, and go for it. So in that way, I think that's also, by the way, for all of the leadership people who are watching this now, I would say go towards those people who are people of color and women, and think about the sponsorship you can provide and think about the support you can provide, because that makes a huge difference.
Well said. Absolutely well said. I think for aspiring individuals who want to get ahead, it's really important to work hard and let the work reflect your capabilities, but also don't be afraid to ask for opportunities. And what you said also about the exposure, making every exposure count, because we can't underestimate the impact those exposures could have on our career. And you gave a perfect example, because these two young ladies probably never imagined that the CEO of Hyatt Hotels Corporation would reach out to them.
They were a little surprised when I reached back out to them, I have to say.
So nice of you and so wonderful of you to offer assistance and mentorship to these individuals. Thank you for doing that. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but Mark, thanks again for the wonderful, remarkable role that you play in the industry. You contribute so much in the industry. You've helped so many people. And I'm a big fan, a big admirer. Thanks again for all you do, and thanks for being on the show.
Well, the admiration is mutual, David. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.